When I first moved to Willowbrook Estates, the HOA president Karen Whitmore seemed like your typical suburban power enthusiast. She had perfectly manicured nails that she'd tap impatiently during meetings, blonde highlights that required weekly maintenance, and a voice that could cut through glass when she was particularly irritated. What I didn't realize was that Karen had developed some very specific ideas about the community pool that would soon become my problem. The first incident happened on a Tuesday afternoon in July. I'd just finished a conference call with my investment firm's Tokyo office, the joys of working across time zones, and decided to take a quick swim to clear my head. The pool area was empty except for Karen, who was lounging on what appeared to be a custom pool float shaped like a swan. She looked up from her magazine with the expression of someone who'd just discovered a cockroach in her salad. "Oh, you must be new here. I'm Karen Whitmore, HOA president." She said this as if the title came with diplomatic immunity. "This is actually my pool time. I have it reserved from 2 to 4 p.m. every weekday." I glanced around the pristine pool area, noting the complete absence of any reservation signs or posted schedules. I wasn't aware the pool had a reservation system. "Is there a sign-up sheet somewhere?" Karen's laugh had the same warmth as a dental drill. "Well, it's not officially posted, but everyone in the neighborhood knows that I use the pool during these hours for my aqua therapy. I have a medical condition." She gestured vaguely at her perfectly healthy-looking body. "Perhaps you could come back around 5? Being new to the neighborhood and generally preferring peace over conflict, I nodded politely and left. But something about her smug expression, as I gathered my towels, suggested this wouldn't be the last of such encounters. The next week, I arrived at the pool at 10 a.m., surely early enough to avoid Karen's mysterious medical aqua therapy sessions. But there she was again, this time with what appeared to be a portable speaker playing meditation music loud enough to be heard in the next county. She was floating serenely in the center of the pool, arms spread wide, like she was claiming the entire body of water through some ancient ritual of suburban entitlement. "Oh," she called out, not bothering to move from her spread eagle position. "I started coming earlier this week. My doctor says consistency is key for my condition." She paused dramatically. "I really do need the entire pool area for my therapy sessions. The vibrations from other swimmers interfere with my healing energy." I stood there holding my swim gear, watching this woman treat a community amenity like her personal spa. "Karen, this is a shared facility. The HOA dues we all pay include pool access for everyone." Her eyes narrowed to slits that would make a snake proud. "As HOA president, I think I know a little more about how these facilities should be used than someone who just moved here last month. Maybe you should review the community guidelines." She reached for a laminated folder that appeared to materialize from thin air. Section 4.7 clearly states that residents must use shared amenities in a manner that doesn't disturb others. Your presence would be very disturbing to my medical routine. I'd worked in corporate law before transitioning to investment management, so I knew bureaucratic nonsense when I heard it. But I also knew that fighting an HOA president on her home turf without proper preparation was like bringing a water balloon to a rocket launcher fight. So I retreated again, but this time I made a mental note to actually read those community guidelines she kept referencing. That evening, I pulled up the Willowbrook Estates HOA documents on my laptop. After 20 years of reviewing contracts and legal documents for high-stakes deals, I could spot inconsistencies and loopholes from space. What I found was interesting. Very interesting. The pool guidelines mention nothing about individual reservations, medical exemptions, or exclusive use periods. In fact, Section 4.7 that Karen had referenced actually stated that no resident could monopolize shared amenities to the exclusion of others. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to the pool the next day at noon. Karen was there, of course, now with what appeared to be a floating desk where she was dramatically reviewing HOA violation notices while lounging in the pool. When she saw me, her face went through several color changes that would have impressed a mood ring. "I thought we discussed this yesterday," she said, her voice reaching frequencies that probably bothered dogs 3 neighborhoods over. "This is still my therapy time." I pulled out a printed copy of the actual HOA guidelines. "I reviewed section 4.7 like you suggested, Karen. It's quite clear that no resident can monopolize shared amenities. I think there might be some confusion about the rules." For a moment, Karen's face showed genuine surprise, as if the concept that someone might actually read the documents she'd been misquoting was completely foreign to her. Then her expression shifted to something that could charitably be described as nuclear rage. "Listen here," she said, paddling her floating desk toward the pool edge like some sort of aquatic war general. "I don't care what those dusty old documents say. I've been using this pool for my medical needs for 3 years, and that creates what's called a precedent. Look it up." She climbed out of the pool with all the dignity of someone wearing a sparkly bikini and flip-flops shaped like flamingos. "And furthermore, as HOA president, I have the authority to make reasonable accommodations for medical conditions. My condition requires pool therapy in a stress-free environment, which means without other people splashing around and creating negative energy." This was the moment I realized that Karen wasn't just entitled or confused about the rules. She had constructed an entire alternate reality where the community pool was her personal medical spa, and anyone challenging this delusion was committing some sort of suburban hate crime. There's no reasoning with that level of self-delusion, but there are other approaches. Over the next week, Karen's pool behavior escalated to heights that would have impressed a dictator of a small island nation. She began arriving at 7 a.m. and staying until 7 p.m., claiming her condition now required 12 hours of daily aqua therapy. She installed a small refrigerator on a pool cart, brought in potted plants to create what she called her healing garden, and even set up a small tent for shade that looked suspiciously like she was establishing a permanent residence. When other residents complained, Karen would launch into lengthy monologues about discrimination against people with invisible disabilities, the importance of wellness in community living, and her rights as a long-term resident. She'd wave around official-looking documents that turned out to be printouts from wellness blogs and alternative medicine websites, none of which had anything to do with HOA regulations or actual law. The breaking point came on a Saturday, when I arrived at the pool to find Karen hosting what she called a poolside HOA meeting. She'd set up a folding table in the shallow end, had various documents in plastic sleeves floating around her, and was addressing an audience of exactly 0 people while speaking into her phone as if conducting a live stream. As you can see, she was saying to her phone, "I'm conducting official HOA business from our community pool, which demonstrates the multi-purpose nature of this facility and my authority to regulate its use." She noticed me and gestured grandly. And here we have a perfect example of a resident who refuses to respect established protocols and medical accommodations. I'd reached my limit. Not just because Karen had essentially homesteaded a community pool, but because she was now creating content about it, probably for social media, which meant this insanity was being broadcast to the wider world. It was time to deploy some of the resources I'd been keeping in reserve. You see, my transition from corporate law to investment management hadn't been a career change so much as an expansion. My firm specialized in real estate development and municipal bonds, which meant I had relationships with city planners, construction companies, and various local government officials. More importantly, I had learned that the most effective solutions to bureaucratic problems often required thinking several moves ahead, like chess played with building permits and zoning regulations. That weekend, I made some phone calls. First to my friend Janet at the city planning office, then to my old colleague Marcus who'd moved into municipal consulting, and finally to a civil engineer named David who owed me a favor from a project we'd worked on 2 years ago. By Monday morning, I had a plan that was both completely legal and absolutely devastating. The beauty of Karen's position was that she'd painted herself into a corner. She claimed the pool was medically necessary for her condition, established a pattern of exclusive use, and documented everything on social media. She'd also made it clear that she viewed the pool as essential to her daily routine and quality of life. All of this would work perfectly for what I had in mind. On Tuesday morning, I submitted 3 applications to the Willowbrook Estates HOA board. The first was a formal complaint about Karen's monopolization of the pool, complete with photos, timestamps, and resident testimonials. The second was a request for a special assessment to fund pool renovations to address what I characterized as urgent safety and accessibility concerns. The third was my application to join the HOA board as vice president, a position that had been vacant for 6 months. Karen's response was swift and predictable. She called an emergency HOA meeting for Friday evening, sending out notices that barely met the legal requirement for advance notification. The meeting was, of course, held at the pool area, where Karen had set up what appeared to be a courtroom complete with folding chairs arranged in rows facing her floating desk, which she'd somehow anchored in the center of the shallow end. "We're here to address some very serious accusations," she announced from her aquatic command center, wearing what appeared to be a business blazer over her swimsuit. "It seems some residents don't understand the difference between legitimate medical accommodations and recreational swimming." She fixed me with a stare that could have melted steel. "Perhaps they need a reminder about the importance of community wellness and following proper channels for complaints." I stood up from my folding chair with the kind of calm that comes from knowing you're holding all the cards. "Actually, Karen, I think there might be some confusion about proper channels. I've submitted my concerns to the city planning office, and they've raised some interesting questions about our pool facilities." Karen's expression shifted from smug superiority to mild concern. "What kind of questions?" "Well," I continued, pulling out a folder thick enough to choke a horse, "it turns out that our pool doesn't meet current ADA accessibility standards. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires specific accommodations for disabled residents, and our current setup is quite problematic." I gestured to her floating desk and various pool accessories. "Having the pool area cluttered with personal items and unofficial equipment creates accessibility barriers that could result in significant fines and legal liability for the HOA." The color began draining from Karen's face like water from a broken pool. But my medical condition." "Oh, absolutely," I said with the sympathy of a shark discussing dinner plans. "Your medical needs are exactly why this is so concerning. If you require daily pool therapy, then we need to ensure the facility meets all federal accessibility standards. That means a complete renovation including new entry systems, updated drainage, compliant decking, and professional medical equipment." I flipped through several pages of official-looking documents. "The city estimates it'll cost approximately $400,000, which will require a special assessment of about $8,000 per household." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Karen's floating desk bumping gently against the pool wall. You could practically hear the gears turning in her head as she processed the implications. A special assessment of $8,000 per household in a neighborhood where she'd made enemies of half the residents by monopolizing their pool. But I wasn't done. "Of course, there's another option. The city planning office mentioned that if the pool is being used primarily for individual medical therapy rather than general community recreation, it might need to be reclassified as a medical facility. That would require different permits, professional oversight, and compliance with healthcare facility regulations." I smiled with the warmth of a January morning. The good news is that medical facilities don't fall under HOA jurisdiction, so you'd have complete control. The less good news is that insurance and operational costs for a medical facility are significantly higher, and there are restrictions about who can access medical facilities without proper authorization. Karen's mouth was opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The other residents were looking back and forth between us like they were watching the world's most suburban tennis match. But here's the interesting part, I continued, really getting into my stride now. I did some research on community pools and medical accommodations, and it turns out there's a precedent for converting shared amenities to specialized medical facilities when a resident demonstrates consistent, exclusive medical need. I pulled out another set of documents. Since you've established a 3-year pattern of exclusive medical use, documented your condition, and created content demonstrating that this pool is essential for your daily medical routine, you've actually built a strong case for medical facility conversion. The pieces were clicking together in Karen's head, and her expression was shifting from confusion to dawning horror. Wait, what exactly are you saying? I'm saying that based on your own documented use patterns and medical claims, I petitioned the city to have our community pool reclassified as a private medical therapy facility under your exclusive management. I held up a thick stack of papers. The petition includes all your social media posts about your medical needs, the photos of your 12-hour daily therapy sessions, and testimonials from residents about your consistent exclusive use of the facility. Karen's face had gone completely white. You can't, that would mean. It would mean the pool would be your personal medical facility, just like you always wanted, I said cheerfully. Of course, you'd be personally responsible for all medical facility licensing, insurance, maintenance, and operational costs. The city estimates that'll run about $15,000 per month, not including the initial compliance modifications. I flipped to another page. Oh, and since it would no longer be a community amenity, the HOA would need to reduce the monthly dues by about 40% to account for the lost facility value, and provide equivalent recreational facilities elsewhere. The silence stretched out like a rubber band about to snap. Karen was staring at me with the expression of someone who had just realized they'd been playing chess, while their opponent was playing four-dimensional warfare. But I don't want to pay for a medical facility, she stammered. I just wanted to use the pool for my therapy. I understand, I said with infinite patience. But you've spent 3 years establishing that this pool is medically essential for your condition, that you require exclusive access, and that community use interferes with your medical treatment. I gestured to her floating desk and healing garden setup. You've created extensive documentation proving that this facility functions as your personal medical therapy center rather than a community pool. Karen was now looking around desperately at the other residents, as if hoping someone would rescue her from the logical conclusion of her own behavior. But the faces staring back at her showed varying degrees of satisfaction, amusement, and schadenfreude. These were people who'd been denied access to their own community pool for 3 years, while Karen played aquatic medical dictator. There has to be another option, Karen said, her voice reaching the pitch that dogs use for emergency communication. Actually, there is, I replied. You could admit that your pool use has been recreational rather than medical, acknowledge that you've been monopolizing a community amenity without authorization, and return to normal shared pool usage under the actual HOA guidelines. I paused for effect. Of course, that would mean admitting that you've been misrepresenting your medical condition and misusing your authority as HOA president for personal benefit. Karen's expression went through several rapid changes as she processed this. Admitting she'd been wrong would undermine her authority and probably result in her removal as HOA president. But continuing to claim medical necessity would trigger the medical facility conversion, leaving her personally responsible for costs that would bankrupt her within 6 months. This is blackmail, she sputtered. Actually, I said, consulting my documents again, it's just the logical application of your own claims and behavior patterns. You established the precedent, documented the medical necessity, and created the evidence base. I simply submitted your own information to the appropriate authorities. I smiled. It's really quite elegant how your own arguments support the petition. The moment when complete understanding dawned on Karen's face was like watching someone realize they'd been playing with a live grenade for 3 years. Her eyes went wide, her mouth dropped open, and she stared at me with the expression of someone who'd just discovered that their own shadow had been plotting against them all along.